They say ancient Egypt was a land of order, of perfect symmetry, divine kingship, and sacred rules carved into stone. But beneath that polished surface, hidden behind the temples and tombs, lived a world far stranger, far darker, and far more intimate than most people would ever imagine. For the Egyptians, desire was not merely human impulse. It was a cosmic force woven into creation itself. And the most shocking truth is this: their entire universe, according to their own sacred texts, began with an act that today would be considered forbidden. The god Atum, standing alone in the primordial waters, brought the world into existence not through battle or divine speech, but through self-pleasure. His semen became the first gods. His fluids created the first land. In their mythology, desire was not shameful, it was divine energy, raw and unstoppable. And from this single act flowed a civilization that blended sexuality with holiness, magic, and political power in ways that still feel unsettling. Yet when we imagine ancient Egypt, we rarely picture this. We picture the pyramids, the mummies, the pharaohs. We see the gold, the rituals, the dignity of funerary art. What we don't see is the private world beneath it, the rituals that use sexual fluids as offerings, the fertility rites performed in secret chambers, the myths that normalized acts we would consider unthinkable. But these were not fringe beliefs. They shaped everything from kingship to everyday marriage customs. And once you start looking, the evidence is everywhere. Take the myth of Osiris, dismembered by his brother Set, who scattered his body across Egypt. Isis, determined to conceive a son, gathered the pieces, rebuilt her husband, and used magic to restore him just long enough for one final union. For the Egyptians, this was not a grotesque legend. It was the foundation of divine motherhood, royal lineage, and resurrection itself. Sexuality was a path to power strong enough to overcome death. But the darker stories go further. Set, in one of the most controversial myths, attempts to overpower Horus by violating him, an act meant not for pleasure but for humiliation, dominance, and cosmic authority. And these myths weren't whispered or hidden. They were taught openly, performed in ceremonies carved into temple walls. They shaped how people understood the body, desire, and the struggle between order and chaos. So why explore this now? Because understanding Egypt's sexual world reveals something essential about how they saw life itself. To them, desire was creation. Desire was magic. Desire was the bridge between humans and gods, and behind every pharaoh's crown, every temple ritual, every afterlife belief, ran a current of sensual symbolism that modern history books often leave out. But if the myths were unsettling, the real practices were even stranger. Archaeologists have uncovered erotic figurines hidden inside homes, spells written on papyri that used bodily fluids as magical ingredients, rituals performed during festivals where sobriety dissolved, boundaries blurred, and the lines between sacred and profane disappeared. These are the parts of Egyptian life tourists never hear about, the parts buried in desert sands, locked in museum drawers, or translated once and never spoken of again. And that's exactly why this story matters. Because when we strip away the Hollywood glamour, Egypt becomes more human, messy, emotional, superstitious, and driven by desires they believed could summon gods or curse enemies. Their world reminds us that sexuality has always been intertwined with power, fear, and hope. As we journey deeper, each chapter will reveal another layer of this hidden Egypt. A world where divine myths normalized taboo, where magic and desire fused into rituals, where temples became stages of ecstatic worship, where royal scandals reshaped empires, and where the echoes of these practices still linger in cultural beliefs today. Long before the Egyptians carved their laws into stone, their gods had already modeled a universe where desire shaped destiny. To understand why Egyptians embraced rituals modern societies would call forbidden, we must return to the myths that taught them what was normal, what was sacred, and what could bend the powers of life and death. These stories were not hidden in secret scrolls. They were the foundation of temples, festivals, and royal authority. And they began with Atum, the self-created creator whose solitary act sparked existence. Atum's myth was recited by priests, taught to children, and honoured in rituals. In their worldview, self-generated creation was neither shameful nor absurd. It was the highest expression of divine ability, the power to bring forth life from one's own body. This idea resonated deeply in a culture obsessed with fertility, continuity, and rebirth. The human body, like the Nile, was a vessel of endless potential. And if a god could shape the cosmos through desire, then sexuality itself became a sacred channel, not a moral dilemma. But this was only the beginning. Egyptian mythology also revealed how desire could be weaponized. The conflict between Set and Horus, one of the most graphic in ancient literature, carried a message about dominance, legitimacy, and strength. Set's attempt to overpower Horus was not portrayed as an erotic encounter, but as an assertion of power so complete it crossed every boundary. In Egyptian thinking, the body was a battlefield where cosmic authority could be proven or lost. Yet the story takes an unexpected turn. Horus catches Set's intentions and traps him in a clever reversal, leading the gods to judge not by the act itself, but by who controlled the outcome. For the Egyptians, the shame was not in the taboo act, it was in losing dominance. Power, not purity, defined morality. And this worldview shaped the social hierarchies that governed their everyday lives. Then there is Isis, the most cunning deity of all, whose myth would redefine divine motherhood for all of Egyptian history. After Osiris was murdered and dismembered, Isis roamed the land collecting his scattered limbs, weeping as she restored her beloved piece by piece. But one part she could not find, his phallus, which the myth says was swallowed by a fish. So she fashioned a replacement using magic, resurrected him briefly, and conceived Horus in an act that merged necromancy, grief, and devotion. To Egyptians, this wasn't grotesque, it was magnificent. A testament to love stronger than death, magic stronger than decay, and sexuality powerful enough to generate the next rightful king. Isis's act became the model for fertility rituals, protection spells, and royal ideology. The pharaoh, believed to embody Horus, owed his legitimacy to a conception rooted in magic and sexual symbolism. These myths taught Egyptians that taboo acts were not automatically evil. Context mattered, purpose mattered. A god could use sexuality to heal, to create, to win, or to protect. And because the gods behaved this way, human rituals naturally followed. Fertility magic used bodily fluids because Atum used his. Dominance rituals existed because Set and Horus fought through the body. Women invoked Isis when preparing charms for pregnancy or protection. Men invoked Osiris for virility and resurrection. The mythic world was not separate from daily life, it was the blueprint for it. Priests reenacted creation myths during festivals. Kings invoked divine sexual stories to validate their lineage. Couples referenced these myths in fertility prayers, and every Egyptian understood that desire, however strange its forms, connected them to forces far older and more powerful than themselves. These stories normalized a culture where sexuality was fluid, symbolic, and deeply intertwined with cosmic order. But mythology was only the first layer. The real shock appears when we look at how Egyptians used magic, rituals, and everyday objects to channel the intimate acts of their gods. If Egyptian mythology laid the foundation for divine desire, their magical practices brought those beliefs into the homes, bedrooms, and secret chambers of ordinary people. To the ancient Egyptians, sexuality was not a private matter hidden behind closed walls. It was a force of energy that could influence fate. Every longing heart, every fearful husband, every woman desperate for a child turned to rituals where the body became both the tool and the offering. And nowhere is this clearer than in the fertility spells and erotic magic preserved in fragile papyri. One of the most striking discoveries comes from texts describing how sexual fluids were used to awaken divine power. For them, semen and menstrual blood were not waste, they were living essences. They carried the strength of Atum's creation and the mysteries of Isis's fertility. So when a woman wanted to conceive, she might place an amulet shaped like a fertility deity under her bed, combined with whispered invocations written in ink, made partly from bodily fluids. Magic was most potent when it involved the body itself, but fertility was only one part of this enchanted world. Love spells, especially those created by women, reveal a society where desire could be harnessed with startling boldness. Some papyri describe rituals in which a woman mixed traces of her bodily fluids into bread or drink to bind a lover's affection or prevent him from straying. Others tell of men who buried wax figurines beneath thresholds, while chanting curses meant to inflame passion or torment an unfaithful partner. These were not marginal practices, they were part of everyday hopes, fears, and dreams. Archaeologists in Deir el-Medina, a village of skilled workers who built royal tombs, uncovered erotic ostraca, pottery shards painted with explicit scenes. Some depicted acrobatic acts, others invoked fertility themes, and a few may have served as crude spells or charms. These objects suggest that labourers, despite working in the shadow of kings, embraced the same belief. Sexuality, when directed through art or magic, could shift the balance of life. Then there were the ex voto offerings, small objects left at temples to request fertility or healing. Some women offered clay dolls or carvings of exaggerated reproductive features. Others left figurines that invoked protective spirits believed to guard pregnancies. These tokens served as silent prayers, blending faith with the intimate anxieties of family life. Impotence, too, had its remedies. Papyri describe amulets shaped like erect phalluses worn beneath clothing or tied around the waist during sleep. Men sought these charms not merely for physical relief, but for spiritual balance. To lose virility was to lose a spark of divine energy, and magic promised restoration. What makes these practices remarkable is how seamlessly they merged emotion, superstition, and theology. For Egyptians, arousal opened a gateway to divine realms. Sexual energy was a spark, a current, a bridge. In moments of passion, even imagined passion, they believed the veil between worlds grew thinner. A spell whispered in that state carried more weight, more danger, more possibility. Even household objects reflected this belief. Ivory wands carved with protective deities were used during childbirth, tracing circles in the air to ward off malevolent spirits. Some were decorated with naked dancers or fertility symbols, reminders that life entered the world through vulnerability and desire. Taken together, these spells and objects reveal a society where sexuality was not merely physical, it was emotional alchemy, it was divine imitation, and it was a form of protection against loneliness, betrayal, infertility, and misfortune. But perhaps the most dramatic expressions of sexual magic did not happen in homes. They unfolded in temples, under moonlit festivals, guided by priests and priestesses who used ecstasy and ritual to reenact the desires of the gods. And these sacred ceremonies blur the line between holiness and seduction in ways almost unimaginable today. If the private homes of Egypt whispered with intimate spells, the temples roared with rituals that merged ecstasy and sanctity into a single force. For the Egyptians, the divine could not be confined to still statues or silent prayers. The gods were living energies, joyful, wrathful, fertile, chaotic, and their worship demanded emotion as powerful as the stories that defined them. Nowhere was this more evident than in the festivals and ceremonies where sacred desire became a pathway to transcendence. The Festival of Drunkenness, held in honour of Hathor, remains one of the most startling examples. At first glance, it appears to be a celebration of excess, music swelling through the night, wine flowing until the boundaries of self dissolved, and men and women swaying in trance-like movements. But its purpose was profound. According to myth, humanity was once saved by Hathor's transformation from vengeful destroyer to joyful goddess after drinking red beer at Rubi that resembled blood. To reenact this shift, worshippers entered ecstatic states, believing that surrendering to pleasure invited the goddess's protection. These gatherings were not lawless chaos. They were choreographed spiritual experiences where emotion, whether joy, desire, or vulnerability, became a bridge to the divine. The loosening of inhibitions mirrored the myths where gods blurred order and chaos to create balance. For participants, the night offered rebirth, forgiveness, and a fleeting unity with the realms beyond. Temples dedicated to fertility deities also hosted midnight ceremonies meant to reenact the union of divine couples. These rituals were symbolic rather than literal, but their power lay in their sensory intensity. Priests recited ancient hymns describing the god's longing and the goddess's response, while dancers performed movements evoking pursuit, surrender, and renewal. In these sacred performances, desire was not trivial, it was cosmic harmony made visible. The role of priestesses in these ceremonies has long been misunderstood. Older interpretations claimed temple prostitution, but modern scholarship paints a more intricate picture. Priestesses did not serve as objects of pleasure. They were embodiments of divine femininity. Their dances, songs, and ritual gestures carried meanings connected to fertility, healing, and protection. Their presence evoked the goddesses themselves, Hathor's joy, Isis's devotion, Mut's maternal strength. Through them, worshippers felt the nearness of divine desire. Music and scent intensified these experiences. Harps, sistrums, and hand drums echoed through sanctuaries, while incense, often derived from aromatic resins, filled the air, believed to attract gods who travelled on fragrant winds. In this environment, worshippers felt the boundary between the mortal and divine soften. Sensuality did not degrade the ritual, it sanctified it. Even temples not directly tied to fertility carried undertones of sacred intimacy. The daily ritual of awakening a god's statue, bathing it, anointing it, dressing it, symbolized a relationship of care and devotion. Priests approached the divine image with tenderness, as though attending to a living partner. The physicality of the ritual reminded Egyptians that the gods were not remote beings, they were intimately present. Some ceremonies honoured the annual flooding of the Nile, the life-giving act seen as a divine union between earth and sky. Offerings included fruits, flowers, and symbolic figurines that reflected fertility themes. By participating, Egyptians believed they were helping sustain the rhythm of creation itself. These temple practices reveal the mindset of a culture where desire was inseparable from holiness. To the Egyptians, emotion was a form of communication with the divine. Pleasure was not sinful, it was transformative. Through ecstatic worship, they reenacted the myths, renewed cosmic balance, and affirmed their place within the sacred cycle of life. Yet the most turbulent expressions of sexuality occurred not in temples, but within the royal court. There, desire could crown a ruler or spark a rebellion. Seduction, scandal, and ritual intertwined in ways that changed the fate of empires. In the courts of ancient Egypt, sexuality was more than human impulse. It was politics, ritual, and weaponry. If the temples explored desire as cosmic energy, the palace transformed it into a force that could legitimize a dynasty or destroy one. Every royal marriage, every whispered rumor, every accusation of infidelity carried the weight of divine symbolism. For the Egyptians, the pharaoh embodied Horus, the living god. His partners embodied powerful goddesses. Their unions were meant to mirror the myths that shaped the universe. And when those unions faltered, the political consequences could shake an empire. Sibling marriage, for instance, was not a moral scandal, it was a spiritual declaration. Just as Osiris and Isis were siblings and lovers, royal families believed that only those with divine blood could reproduce divine authority. A pharaoh's marriage to his sister or half-sister preserved purity, not merely of lineage but of cosmic legitimacy. To modern eyes it feels taboo, but to Egyptians it ensured stability. The body of the ruler was a public vessel of divine order, and his intimate relationships carried sacred meaning. Yet royal sexuality also bred suspicion and intrigue. Some pharaohs were rumoured to reenact creation myths during festivals, symbolically performing the acts of Atum or Osiris to renew their authority each year. Whether these stories reflect literal actions or political symbolism is uncertain, but what matters is that Egyptians believed sexuality could regenerate power. A king who refused or failed to perform these sacred duties risked appearing disconnected from the gods. Queen Taye, mother of Akhenaten, faced accusations in foreign correspondence that she manipulated kings through charm and influence. Her intelligence and authority unsettled neighbouring rulers who interpreted her political role through the lens of seduction. Though unfounded, the rumours reveal how easily sexuality became a stage for diplomacy and rivalry. The Turin erotic papyrus presents another dimension of royal and social attitudes. Its exaggerated scenes depict acrobatic acts, oversized anatomy, and parodies of intimacy. Scholars debate its purpose. Was it satire mocking elite excess? A manual for entertainment? A reflection of courtly humour? Whatever its intent, the papyrus exposes a culture willing to explore sexuality through art that mixed comedy, critique, and fantasy. Even in sacred Egypt, laughter and eroticism coexisted. And then there was Hatshepsut, one of the most powerful women in Egyptian history. Her enemies later accused her of seductive manipulation, claiming she used her femininity to assume the throne meant for men. These rumours, recorded long after her reign, reflect more about political resentment than truth. But they show how accusations of sexual impropriety could be used to discredit even the most capable ruler. The harem conspiracy against Ramesses III reveals the darkest intersection of sexuality and power. Behind palace walls, a secondary wife named Tiye sought to place her son on the throne. She and her allies used secret networks of intimacy and influence, harem attendants, scribes, guards, to orchestrate a plot involving magic, bribery, and seduction. When uncovered, the conspirators were put on trial, and texts reveal shocking details. Lovers exchanging coded messages, women leveraging their proximity to the king, and accusations of using love spells to manipulate royal decisions. Desire became rebellion, intimacy became treason. These scandals demonstrate that in Egypt, sexuality was inseparable from authority. Kingship demanded a divine body, queenship required symbolic fertility, and rumours of impropriety could shape history as powerfully as armies. Each whisper reflected the belief that desire was a force capable of blessing a dynasty or cursing it. But Egypt's fascination with sexual symbolism did not die with its pharaohs. Its echoes travelled across continents and centuries, influencing the beliefs, charms, and taboos that still persist in parts of the world today. Long after the last pharaoh fell and the temples crumbled to sand, the echoes of Egypt's erotic imagination continued to ripple through the ancient world. The rituals, spells, and myths that once governed daily life did not vanish. They were absorbed, adapted, and transformed by cultures across the Mediterranean and the Near East. Fertility charms, protective amulets, and erotic symbolism travelled with traders and priests, embedding themselves into the magic and superstition of later civilizations. What the Egyptians had once performed in secret chambers or under moonlit festivals became faint whispers in Mediterranean lore, shaping ideas of desire, power, and protection for centuries. Consider the continued use of virility charms. Small figurines, phallic amulets, and inscriptions invoking divine potency persisted in Greek and Roman households, reflecting an enduring belief that sexual energy could be controlled, directed, and harnessed. Protective spells written in ink, much like the love and binding spells of Deir el-Medina, appear in later magical papyri, often blending Egyptian deities with Greco-Roman ones. Even clothing and jewellery were worn not merely for adornment but to channel sexual power and attract favour, echoing the intimate symbolism first codified along the Nile. The moral and symbolic frameworks also endured. Gender roles, sexual taboos, and the association of desire with authority were woven into social structures long after the pharaohs disappeared. The Egyptian notion that fertility, arousal, and magical potency were interconnected influenced religious and magical practices from the Levant to North Africa. Human sexuality remained a conduit for protection, prestige, and power, a thread connecting the domestic, sacred, and political spheres as it had in Egypt. Yet archaeology has a more haunting message. For all their attempts to control life, death, and desire, the Egyptians' most intimate secrets were buried by time. Papyrus fragments, amulets, and on to ostraka reveal a culture both meticulous and daring, precise in ritual, yet unflinching in imagination. They sought to master desire, to sanctify passion, and to bridge mortality with the divine, but the desert, with its winds and sands, preserved only fragments. What remains today is a puzzle, tantalizing and incomplete, a reminder that human obsession with sexuality, magic, and power transcends eras. This knowledge compels reflection. Egypt teaches that desire is neither shameful nor trivial. It is deeply human, yet also profoundly transformative. It can bless, curse, legitimize, or destroy. It can produce life, inspire devotion, or destabilize empires. The myths, spells, and rituals of ancient Egypt reveal a civilization that understood intimacy as a tool, a weapon, and a bridge to forces beyond comprehension. They remind us that sexuality has always been intertwined with the quest for meaning, influence, and survival. Even today, we sense the resonance of these practices. Modern superstitions, charms, and cultural taboos often trace back to Egyptian roots, whether consciously or subconsciously. And the allure of forbidden knowledge, of the intimate and shocking, continues to captivate us. Archaeologists may uncover fragments, historians may interpret them, but the emotional, psychological, and spiritual power of Egypt's approach to desire remains intact. In the end, the ancient Egyptians pursued control over the most intimate forces of existence: sex, fertility, and power, with courage, audacity, and ingenuity. Their rituals were bizarre, their myths unsettling, yet they reveal a universal truth. Humanity has always sought to harness desire, to make it sacred, to bend it towards survival, protection, and meaning. And through the sands of time, their most secret passions continue to whisper across millennia, daring us to confront the raw, strange, and eternal force that is human desire.